talking with some people about why Valve is so successful, and what you could learn from that. And I think a lot of people get stuck up on the flat company thing as thinking that's the answer, and I would argue it's actually something else. And while the flat company is a structure of itself that empowers this, it really is that they don't hire for roles, but they hire for people. Now, when you're a small company, you can't do that. You have to hire for a role. Like if you need a technical artist, you need a technical artist. You're screwed, right? But as they grew, they realized it was way more interesting just to put interesting people in the company and find out what happens. I'm a hire like that, right? I mean, I was hired for writing, but I think Gabe wasn't really sure what that would play out to be. So when Eric and I were hired, we didn't actually go through a traditional interview process. We did not sit down and go through an 8-hour long day. And so we just hung out with Gabe for 3 days. And at the end of it, he offered us a job. So which is more intense or less intense, I don't know. But he would tell us when we first started, just walk down the hallways and just, enter any room and you'll make the room better by just your input. And it's like, well, that's crazy. These people just made Half-Life 2 and just shipped that. Like, how am I gonna make them better? But what happens is when you hire like that is that you get people who then over time get empowered. Like early on, you're not, right? Early on, you're just like, oh my God, I'm gonna get fired because I'm not doing anything and all these people are really talented. But over a course of time, you learn some roles, you learn your thing. But the really good part of that is you then have a broader understanding of the company. Now, some people might just be a concept artist and they're just heads down concept artists and they just love to draw concept art and that is all they're gonna do. And they love that and they're happy. And that has a place for that too. But for other people, for some people, including not just myself, but there's other engineers and other people, you have to get a broader spectrum of it. And that's way better. So once I was talking to somebody from a large Eastern European developer, and they're like, how do we get to 10,000 people? This is way too many people. And he's just like, well, we had a box and we had to move it from here to there. So we hired someone to do that. And I'm like, well, how do we do that? We hire somebody to move it from there to there. And you just keep hiring more people to move boxes. You don't just have one person move boxes. Or as Gabe would like to put it, you can make one senior person have to move the boxes and they're going to figure out some way to automate that process, right? And so that's a lot of what happens is you give problems to somebody else and say, you don't care how you solve it, just this is your problem now. And you get people then, and again, it doesn't have to be everybody. And I'm not saying like, oh, I'm so smart or so great because I was across this way. But you get people who have an understanding of a lot of parts of the business that can say, hey, things are changing, or hey, we need to think about this. I remember at one point working on, this was after TF2 had really blown up and some other things were going on, being like, hey, some people are really uncomfortable with the community making the art. And they think like, oh, we're so good at this, we should be the one driving this. And the reality is you can go look at the early videos we did about TF2 and how deliberate we were about the art and how great Moby's art was. And it was fabulous. He's a great artist and a really good person. But the reality is there's a point we opened it up. And I remember there was a point where it was one of the, like early on in TF2, they would someone would come onto Steam and they would take one of those characters and put it into the game. One of those characters just did not mesh with the art style at all. It was just crazy different. And I just remember thinking at that happening, going, this is an inflection point. Either we reject this because we think we're so smart about character recognition and all this. And all that was true when we did it. Or it just doesn't really matter once people are comfortable with the game. And it ends up, it didn't really matter. And we were able to just kind of ingest every style into that game because it just still kind of works. Now, it worked because the people playing it kind of changed, right? They kind of adapted and didn't be the hardcore, we're making a competitive shooter, but into morphing to this kind of having a fun kind of game. And so that has to happen as well, but you have to be aware of that. And so if you're a small company, I got no advice for you. Excuse me. Don't belch on camera. But if you're a bigger company, think about hiring the people and not worrying about the exact role. Because if you do hire smart people or good people, they're going to figure it out. They're going to sweat it. They're going to be like me, up at night not being able to sleep because I can't figure out like where I fit into this. And I'm working with a bunch of smart people. What can I do? What can I offer? And they're going to figure it out. Right? Again, it feels like I'm complimenting myself in some backhanded way. But the reality is I wasn't smart enough to hire me. I wouldn't have hired me if I was Gabe. But like that is a really important thing to try to do. And so as you're growing your company, make some wildcard hires. See how it goes, right? I mean, it was definitely, Gabe hired us by fiat, and I think some people disagreed with it. Some people came up later to me. Doug Lombardi one time came up to me later after we'd become friends. He goes, I was against hiring you. Really good hire. So like people can change on that, but just try it. mix it up, because sometimes it isn't that person that just fits into that slot, but it's the person who kind of sits over across a lot of things. And then the person will go off and start their own company and be like, oh God, I forgot how hard this part is. But there you go.